Ladies and gentlemen, it is finally time for me to debut my new series. It's been a long time coming, but this is Retoro Review. This is a brand new set of videos where I will go into detail over games that I've been played, and I will review them. We will review them. Retoro over here will pop up occasionally to help with supplemental context and just help with visual clarification. Now, this series is going to be a little bit different from how most other game reviewers do it, meaning I'm going to introduce two rating systems. Rating system number 1 is going to be the objective tier list, where each tier represents different objective viewpoints of the game. The objective score will be based on if the game is worth the price, if the game offers style and substance, if the game can keep you entertained for long periods of time, and if the game offers great replayability. Other aspects, like how well the game controls, level and puzzle design, and fairness when it comes to enemy or player encounters, will also be factored into this objective system. The objective tier list goes from F tier to X tier. X tier obviously sitting at the highest for games that I think are beyond worth the price, damn near must-haves for gamers, and offer great replayability, especially if you want to spend time completing it. And F tier sitting at the lowest and is obviously reserved for games that are not worth playing and not worth completing, and generally should be avoided unless you're morbidly curious. Rating system number 2 is going to be my personal and subjective standpoint on the game. The subjective score will be based on if the game captures my attention personally, if the game exceeds my expectations, and if the game seems as though something I would play again, based on my experience with games I like. The subjective rating will be based on how fun I think the game is, and will span from offensive to addictively fun. At the end of each review, games will be displayed on this graph, of which I've laid out the axes perfectly, and of course, games that I think are better are going to be in the top right corner, while games that I think are worse are going to be in the bottom left. And one more thing, these are condensed reviews. If you want longer, more in-depth reviews, please show your support in the comments, because that's the only way that I'll know whether or not I should make a new series focusing on more in-depth reviews. And all videos in this series will contain spoilers, so you've been warned, and I'll put warnings at the beginning of each video. But that being said, let's get it. And what better game to start out with than my personal pick for Game of the Year of 2023, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. As of the time of writing the script, I have only completed the story. I've not taken the time to 100% the game, but I don't think I need to in order to relay how I feel about this game. Okay, let's start simply with the story. Tears of the Kingdom takes place after the great calamity of the previous game in the Zelda series, Breath of the Wild, wherein Link and Zelda are exploring this mysterious substance known as gloom that has been spontaneously seeping from beneath the ruins of Hyrule Castle. Upon making their way to the Grand Underground Sanctum, they find the game's main villain, Ganondorf, in suspended animation, and accidentally disrupt this stasis by grabbing this teardrop-shaped secret stone. Ganondorf awakens and uses his magic to break the Master Sword, wither Link's arm, effectively making him an amputee, separate Link and Zelda, and raise Hyrule Castle into the sky. Zelda is blinked away into the distant past, while Link is saved and whisked away by this magical arm up to the ancient lands in the skies. This arm was the key to keeping Ganondorf in stasis, and belonged to the first king of Hyrule, King Rauru, of the ancient Zonai race. Rauru's arm attaches to where Link's withered arm was, and serves as a way for Link to harness his new rune abilities: Ultra Hand, Fuse, Ascend, Recall, and Auto Build. As Link, after completing the first Sky Island, you present the withered Master Stump to this mysterious glowing light, where it is transported through time to Zelda. Then you return to the surface world, where your most pressing task is to track down these fabled dragon's tears located in these newly appeared geoglyphs. These dragon's tears are left behind from the Light Dragon, a transformed version of Zelda from the past. Hold your pants, we'll get to it in a second. Link's second main objective is to help out the lands of Hyrule. Ganondorf's dark magic has caused several plagues upon Hyrule. Zora's Domain is dealing with falling goop from the sky that makes swimming difficult. Rito Village is dealing with extreme blizzards that makes flying difficult. Gerudo Desert is dealing with these undead enemies that only take elemental damage, and their leader, Riju, cannot focus her lightning attacks to aim properly. And Death Mountain is dealing with a hypnosis issue, wherein everyone is too damn lazy to move. Upon finding these geoglyphs and fixing these problems throughout Hyrule, Link and his magically gifted allies storm Hyrule Castle and defeat Ganondorf for the first time. They learn after their first fight that they still aren't powerful enough to truly defeat him, and realize there is a final area to liberate, the underground chasms, which appeared after Ganondorf raised the roof. After exploring the depths of the underground, Link makes contact with one of the ancient Zonai spirits, Minoru, who sealed her soul away in this Zonai construct. Link reassembles the construct and gets not only his fifth ally, but a mech to ride around and fight with. With this added ally, Link and his friends storm the chasm beneath Hyrule Castle down to the depths where they explored Hyrule Castle before, and fight Ganondorf's dark enemies as well as the fully rejuvenated Demon King himself. However, before Link can truly defeat Ganondorf himself, he devours his secret stone and becomes the Demon Dragon. The Light Dragon, aka Zelda, swoops in during Ganondorf's last stand and helps you defeat the Demon King. Upon doing so, Zelda returns to her normal form and you both fall to the safety of Hyrule below. Yeah, while I'm on that, let me detail what happened from Zelda's perspective. After being thrown back in time, Zelda realizes she was sent to the beginning of Hyrule, back to when Hyruleans, the ancestors of Hylians, and Zonai lived in harmony. King Rauru and Queen Sonia, the first royalty of Hyrule, find Zelda and try to help her figure out how to return to the present. While doing so, Ganondorf appears from the Gerudo Desert and tries to take the power of the Secret Stones for himself, first using brute force and then using sneaky diplomacy. Ganondorf's ultimate goal is to recreate the world in darkness as he sees fit, and rule as the Demon King, and he can only do that with the enormous power of the Secret Stones. Rauru sees through Ganondorf's plans and more or less brushes him off, knowing his intentions are impure. Zelda realizes then that Ganondorf existed when she and Link explored the ruins of Hyrule Castle, and so she knows that at some point Ganondorf will seize power and that Rauru won't be able to defeat him. Zelda and Rauru's relative Minoru try to brainstorm ideas for getting Zelda back to her timeline, all ideas coming up fruitless except for one, which is for Zelda to ingest a secret stone and turn into an immortal dragon at the cost of her sanity. For the time being, they throw out that idea, and Zelda instead tries to brainstorm reasons as to why she even was whisked off to the past with Queen Sonia. At some point, Queen Sonia and Zelda are ambushed by Ganondorf, who kills the queen and takes her secret stone, and effectively wages war against Rauru. Rauru assembles a team of 6 sages to help alongside him to fight against Ganondorf, and he gives them secret stones to help. They try in vain to defeat Ganondorf, so Rauru sacrifices his life to seal himself and Ganondorf away for thousands of years locked in stasis. Zelda, depressed over the events that unfolded, walks around Sonia's garden thinking about how she can get home and help Link defeat Ganondorf. It's at this point when she receives the Master Sword from Link in the present, and from that she sees how damaged it is and has an idea. She tells Minoru that she intends to become an immortal dragon and seal the Master Sword inside of her in order to bathe it in sacred light so it can rejuvenate and become powerful enough to defeat Ganondorf once and for all. Thing is, it would be sealed within her until that point in time, which is great and all, except for the fact that this game exists, meaning there are 2 Master Swords that exist at the same time. Oops. Anyways, aside from that hiccup, Zelda holds onto the Master Sword until Link supposedly retrieves it from her during one of the quests in the game. Technically, just like in Breath of the Wild, the Master Sword and really any gear besides Rauru's arm is optional. You could try to thug it out and rock up to the final boss after playing the game for 30 minutes and beat his ass to death with sticks and stones if you really wanted to, but I digress. Anyways, after Zelda is returned to her normal state, some time passes and the main heroes make their way to the Sky Islands, where Link and his allies, which are effectively this generation of sages, pledge their loyalty and allegiance to Zelda and Hyrule, and Minoru's spirit can rest and join Rauru's and Sonia's. Besides the obvious time plot hole, I'd say this story is relatively well contained. It's not terribly difficult to understand, but still offers some things to think about. Since you learn about the story in fragmented pieces, and you can technically find each dragon's tier out of canonical order, it leaves a lot of wondering to the audience. But by the end of the story, there's enough to not feel as though you're missing information, provided you didn't skip any of the dragon's tiers. I'm actually not even sure if you can skip any of the dragon's tiers before defeating Ganondorf. Either way, the story ultimately leaves one loose end that seems like a bit of an oversight, but thematically makes sense within the contained storyline. It's not trying to be too complex with the time aesthetic, but it's not baby drool simple. I personally think that the story alone is enough to keep people interested and wanting more with each fragment they uncover. I was not expecting Ganondorf to easily sneak Queen Sonia in her room. I figured Ganondorf's idea of trying to infiltrate the Queen's personal quarters would have failed, but that's a nice little unexpected point that kept me engaged. I also love that Ganondorf didn't try to go straight for the power out of nowhere. He had attempted attacks on Hyrule before, at a distance, but could not overcome the power of the Secret Stones. This is how he learned and overcame the obstacle, and showed how his smarts worked alongside his literal strength, using deception instead of brute force. Albeit, Ganondorf this time around doesn't really have a motive for his power craze besides just being evil. I know Ganondorf has been known as a jealous, power-seeking entity that is always reincarnated through Demise, the god of evil, malice, and darkness, but I do wish we got some other reasons why Ganondorf became who he was. They had an opportunity to write Ganondorf as more than just power-hungry, but to make him perhaps more extremist. Then again, I understand why. The established lore reason across all of Zelda is that he simply is a reincarnation of Demise. Nothing more, nothing less. So, I suppose it's fine. I'd like to see them expand on ideas like that in the future, though. On the other end of the spectrum, I'm not a huge fan of the Dragon of Light part. I do like the design of the dragon and the mystery for the whole game, because there's just all of a sudden a fourth immortal dragon alongside the three from Breath of the Wild, but the way one turns into a dragon seemed as though it came out of nowhere. It felt like a last-minute addition to the story to explain how we get Zelda back to the present. There is no mention of this, nor any prophecy throughout the game that alludes to this process whatsoever, not even really a kernel of information, aside from the dragon's tears themselves. So, when it shows up as a potential last-minute idea, it doesn't feel like something that has been weighing on Zelda throughout the game. It feels like a crutch, because they couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with Zelda or the Master Sword. I want to reiterate, it's not bad per se, it just comes across as a wait, what the fuck kind of thing, and it raises more questions than answers. Are Dinral, Naedra, and Farosh also products of the same transformation process, or are they truly immortal? In previous Zelda games, the goddesses turned themselves into useful items for the hero of time, Link. Here, were they just always primordial dragons, or were they really just strong mortal Zonai that turned into dragons long before the events of the past in Tears of the Kingdom? And then Zelda turning back into a Hylian is just as weird. Why do Sonia and Rauru have the ability to revert the dragons? Is this because they're already deceased, or because it's Zelda? That part isn't explained either. When the aspect of the dragon transformation comes up, it's implied that this process cannot be undone. Minoru even makes a big deal about how dangerous and risky the option is, implying she has no way to reverse it should things go south. So, were Rauru and Sonia holding on to this information all this time, or see what I mean? But instances like this are a few and far between when it comes to the story. Overall, very solid story. But a solid story can't save the game if the game plays ass, and that's what this next section is about. And to be quite honest, this is one of the better feeling third-person action-adventure games I've played in a while. That said, there are some problems I ran into. The button layout is exactly the same as it was in Breath of the Wild, but there are a few additions and changes in some abilities. Most of the standard functions like running, jumping, and switching and using weapons are intuitive and tight, and generally inoffensive. Really, where we see some good and bad innovations are with the runes and ally abilities. You get 5 major runes mapped to your left bumper. If you hold it, you can see your runes, map, and camera, and you can use your control stick to select which rune you want to use. Ultra Hand allows you to grab any object. Unlike Magnesis from Breath of the Wild, where you could only grab metallic things, you can grab anything you want, within reason. Usually, regardless of size, so long as it is a grabbable or interactable object. You can also stitch things together with the Ultra Hand, which, if you remember, led to insane creations at the beginning of the summer. I'm thoroughly surprised too. The sheer amount of things you can interact with and stick together is more than you might think, and some puzzles and shrines can be completed by Ultra Handing objects from previous puzzles within the same shrine. Fuse allows you to fuse items to your melee weapon, arrows, and shield. You can make ridiculously long sticks to where some enemies won't even be able to reach you. You can make swords and arrows more powerful, or even give them elemental properties. You can strap Zonai devices onto your shield to enhance your mobility or help you solve puzzles. You can even construct things like hammers, wands, and fans to assist with utility. I think the most important part about this ability is the access to elemental arrows. In Breath of the Wild, elemental arrows were additional items that were sold in shops around Hyrule. Now they're replaced with this fuse ability, which does mean you'll need to do some level of memorization to see which items give off which effects, but overall you should be able to tell based on their names and colors. Ascend allows Link to swim upwards through rocks, bridges, and platforms, although there is a bit of limitation. While the distance of how far Link can ascend through structures isn't necessarily limited, Link cannot ascend if the ceiling is too far away or if there's water directly above where he's trying to ascend to. But if you need a quick way out of a situation and there's a ceiling above you, you can immediately reach the surface. And if you get to an area where there's a threat and you don't want to deal with it, you can cancel the ascend and quickly return to where you started. You can even cancel it midway through ascension. Recall allows you to stop time briefly and then, upon selecting an object, reverse its direction. Say a piece of Sky Island falls down near you and you want to go up to see where it came from. Recall it when you're standing on top of it and it can bring you back up. It doesn't seem to work on enemies, and I doubt it works on arrows in mid-air either, but that's to be expected. Otherwise you could just recall everything around you and mitigate opponents outright. The final new rune ability, Auto Build, simply assesses the objects around you and, based on a history list, rebuilds objects you have already built. If you constructed a plane with fans on it before, instead of painstakingly finding each piece in the area and putting it on piece by piece, Auto Build will recognize the materials and reconstruct the plane immediately. It sounds useful. I barely used it. There were a few instances where the ability was really useful, but most of the time I enjoyed making new things each time I ran into new materials. Not a useless ability by any means, but definitely not necessary to enjoy the game. Personally, I find all the new rune abilities to be fun and engaging in their own unique ways. And this leads me to another major compliment. Unlike Breath of the Wild, none of these abilities need to recharge. You can use abilities back to back, and even switch abilities while using others. This makes moving throughout the world and interacting with objects way easier. With the exception of Auto Build, all of these rune abilities are discovered at the very beginning of the game as mandatory parts of the tutorial Sky Islands. These Sky Islands include shrines that teach you about each ability and show you how they can be used creatively to make contraptions or upgrade your combat. When you get into it, you can really make some truly bonkers shit. These are so much more intuitive and engaging in the game than they ever were in Breath of the Wild, but I wish I could say the same about the sages. Alright, I'm just gonna say it. The sages are worse than the champions. Yeah, I know. So, the sages are your homies that you help when you go to the 4 major areas on Hyrule. After helping each amigo out, you can gain access to their sage ability. Prince Sidon gives you a water shield that you can turn into an attack. Tulin gives you a mid-air gust of wind that can help Link paraglide over long distances. Riju gives Link a range where she can strike with lightning after Link fires an arrow. And Yunobo can spin dash and break anything in his way. All moves that are useful, but don't hold a candle to the champion's abilities. I'm sorry. Okay, it's not all bad. When you help out the homies, they unlock their secret stones and use them to gift Link ghosts, basically JoJo's Bizarre Adventure stands that can fight alongside you, and when they do attack, they can help you end fights. Yunobo, unsurprisingly, can hit the hardest, basically one-shot knocking out most of the goons in your way, even the big moblins, the fuckers. And Tulin can fire arrows periodically, which can land crucial headshots and stun lock enemies to give you openings for attacks. And, while this help is nice, none of their abilities directly help Link feel like a one-man army, which is what Link felt like in Breath of the Wild. See, the champion's abilities in Breath of the Wild directly affected Link, and were easier to activate and use. Daruk's protection gave Link a literal force field whenever he used his shield. Urbosa's Fury activated whenever Link charged up an attack. Rivali's Gale activated whenever Link crouched for 2 seconds. Mipha's Grace activated whenever Link died. These were automatic and locked to core functions of Link's natural moveset. But these abilities have to be activated by Link walking up to each ghost and asking nicely for their assistance. Tulin's the only exception because he flies alongside you whenever you're airborne and not gliding directly over a village. But if you want to use Riju's very helpful lightning attack, I have to physically walk to her, which would be fine if she didn't go out of her way to attack monsters. if I want to use that ability, I have to pray to Goddess Hylia. She isn't 23 light years away fighting some goons, or else I have to run over to her, putting myself in harm's way just to perform something that is comparatively less effective than Urbosa's Fury in the previous game. Double dumbass points because Riju's ability is a ranged attack. So by the time I run up to her and get access to the ability, I might as well have whipped out my strongest weapon to fight the damn thing myself. And even if I go get within smooching distance of both the enemy and my ally, I have to pray that one of the other homies doesn't run by and get their move activated by accident. By the way, all abilities are on cooldowns, so I have to wait to activate each move, even if it was an accident. Because of this, some fights and interactions can feel genuinely cluttered and difficult to refocus. By all means, it's not every time, but it happens enough to be mildly annoying. On that topic, Mineru's Construct, the final sage, is a rideable mech that can equip itself with rockets, weapons, and all sorts of useful shit for combat. When you get this sage, she becomes one of the more important sages for traversing the underground. She has no problem walking over the health-sapping gloom, and her abilities can contend with some of the meatier enemies. That said, she is my least favorite, and I understand this is probably mostly a problem I had that many others won't. One mechanic of the game is this Zonai battery called the Energy Cell that you earn on the tutorial Sky Island. This can be used to charge devices that you can create with the Ultra Hand ability. You need to find Zonite around the world and then have it converted into charges and crafted into battery upgrades. Once you make enough of them, you can have devices last for more than long enough to be useful. Now, Mineru's Construct operates on that same technology, meaning in order to get the most out of her, your batteries should be reasonably high. Now, by the time you get to unlocking this thing, you should have upgraded your battery considerably, but because I personally had no use for making crazy contraptions, I didn't care enough to upgrade my battery. So, guess who was tiptoeing around underground fighting some upper level enemies with gas mileage worse than an RV? Yep, I got my ass thoroughly handed to me for just existing while riding this damn thing. In order to do anything, including walking, you are using your energy cell. Poor Mineru's movement speed certainly ain't quick, and her attacks have some wind-up, combined with her tractor-trailer-sized hitbox, and you can imagine the frustration I went through trying to complete her mission. Mind you, it wasn't difficult, just excruciatingly long, but then again, that was entirely because I neglected a feature the game tried to educate me about since the tutorial. Just make sure you try to keep up to speed on your Zonite and you should be fine. As for the world, well, like in Breath of the Wild, this is one of the most expansive games you can get for the Nintendo Switch. This is one large open world with no loading screens or abrupt cuts. There is region-specific weather and a weather cycle. Really, there's everything you can expect from a modern open world. Link's movement, especially when you upgrade his stamina, can allow you to do a lot more and go almost anywhere. Now, since Breath of the Wild, there have been significant changes to parts of the map. The path through the Lost Woods is completely gone. Death Mountain has a new mining facility. One of the stables near Rito Village has been turned into Hyrule's news station, the Lucky Clover Gazette. Terrytown is now the head of operation for Hyrule-wide construction, and a bunch of other notable familiar places from Breath of the Wild have been changed just enough to give you reason to revisit the entire map. The most significant change is with these underground chasms, giant holes that have opened up in the terrain that reveal the dark and undiscovered underground. These areas can be lit up with bright bloom seeds, and then, once you find one of these giant roots, you can light up a significant area of the map. Sometimes traversing underground can be difficult and confusing, based on the fact that, you can't really see anything. It's mostly harmless, but there are a few enemies here and there. Mostly, you'll be watching out for large patches of gloom, which can obviously sap away your health, but can also host enhanced enemies that hit harder and can restrict your maximum health until you return to the sunlight, reach one of the roots, or eat special kind of food that can restore your health to normal. These roots can also unlock major portions of the underground map. Overall, underground is annoying at worst, in my opinion. The Sky Islands are another expanse, but they don't cover nearly as much of the map as the underground, which literally covers every part of Hyrule's walkable terrain. The Sky Islands usually consist of puzzles requiring clever use of the Rune abilities. Some of them are longer than others, and you can gain access to them either by warping up to some of the Sky Islands, using Recall to ride up into the sky from falling debris, or get launched up from these Skyview towers that are simultaneously used to unlock new versions of the surface maps. These, along with the shrines, serve as some of the more interesting parts of the game. Shrines, like in Breath of the Wild, are little access points for Link to test his abilities, ingenuity, and overall strength. They're trials and puzzles that usually only last a few minutes and reward you with Raru's blessings. which can be offered to Goddess Hylia in any of the towns or villages in exchange for heart containers or stamina vessels to increase your maximum health and maximum amount of stamina respectively. There have been some added shrines so Link can now obtain full health and full stamina, unlike in Breath of the Wild where you could max out one but not the other because there simply weren't enough shrines. Not an issue anymore, thankfully. Lastly, the enemies are significantly better in this game in my opinion. The variety of enemies has been upgraded, and the amount of them per enemy camp has also been increased. That said, Nintendo knows how to balance things and made sure that the enemy types and difficulty were placed accordingly. For example, significant areas of the map, like the Hyrule Bridge, is guarded by a Gleeok, basically a Hydra, and each one throughout the map is a different element. If you want to defeat a fire Gleeok easily, you'll want to bring some ice weapons and vice versa. And areas that contain goodies and other useful knickknacks will contain enemies of appropriate difficulty levels. And sometimes Ganondorf ain't playing around. You'll find enemies that even the Master Sword has difficulty defeating. This even extends to Ganondorf himself, which, by the way, is probably the best fight in the Zelda Blank of the Blank series. It's so dynamic and fun because Ganondorf basically has all of the moves Link does, but they're souped up to include dark magic in some way. Really, this boss ups the ante with every phase, and was everything I was hoping for and more. He's difficult and requires some tight timing, but not overly difficult to where you're screaming your head off at every defeat. And the game teaches you about this fight by exposing you to Gloom Hands and Phantom Ganon. These Gloom Hands will appear in areas of low light, usually underground and under some shade, and will try to snatch you up. Get somewhere off the ground, fire some elemental arrows, and then defeat all of them within a few seconds to spawn Phantom Ganon, who hits like a tank but reveals Ganondorf's tried and true movements that he will use during the final fight. Honestly, I thought the bigger threat was the Gloom Hands after fighting Phantom Ganon a few times. Anyways, the enemies in this game are great. And while on this topic, I should also explain that this game doesn't have a traditional leveling system, which is actually to its benefit. You make the game as difficult as you want, so if you want the best armor and weapons to stand the best chance, you have to fight against the hardest enemies. So it's best to start with something moderate, enemies you can defeat with a few makeshift hammers and spears to get some basic swords and shields. What you can upgrade are your stamina and health, as mentioned before, and then your inventory space for melee weapons, bows, and shields. In order to upgrade your inventory, you'll have to find these Koroks hidden within small puzzles, and they will reward you with Korok seeds. These puzzles usually take a few seconds to complete, so they're relatively harmless. But there are way too many of these fuckers. Don't waste your time collecting all of them. It's not worth it to enjoy this game to the fullest. With these seeds, you'll bring them to Hestu, this giant Korok who does a magic happy dance and gives you more space, each one getting slightly more expensive each time. And that brings me to the rating of this game, so let's review. The map size is over double what it was before. Though most of that double size is shrouded in darkness, it is still over double the size. The challenges are intelligently crafted, shrines never feel like a slog to complete, and areas where you're required to think are usually easy enough for a 10-year-old to figure out. The game gives you an abundance of items to use for fusing, cooking, and constructing weapons of mass destruction. The freedom you have with the Ultra Hand you would swear is Minecraft levels of freedom. Being able to store Zonai devices in your back pocket is great when you're in a pinch. Traversing the world, especially above ground, is fun, even while just walking around casually. The world feels alive. You'll find people walking along paths, interacting with one another, going to school, peeping on people around corners, gossiping, everything. Even the enemies have a reasonable amount of charm to them. Some even have personality. The game gives you plenty of customizable options. If you want to make Link look entirely feminine, have at it. The dude's a twink anyways. You can even dye the clothes you find with items from defeated monsters, giving your monster parts more use, in addition to creating elixirs, which can make potions to help with elemental effects. I almost never use them, but they are useful. Control is tight most of the time. Sometimes Link will brush against the side of a wall slightly and assume you wanted to climb it. And sometimes you'll want Link to turn around, but he decides he wants to take the long loop around. Those times are annoying, but otherwise he feels just fine. The lock-on feature is nice, although sometimes Link doesn't turn when he locks onto an enemy, so he may leave part of his side vulnerable to attack, but otherwise it's fine. Honestly, the sheer amount of things to do, especially when it comes to side quests, is insane. You'll find that a lot of the substance and lore in this game is through exploration and talking to people, doing little odd jobs and quests every now and then. Really, this game offers an almost overflowing amount of things to do. I've completed this game's story, went out of my way to give myself 2 stamina wheels and way more health than what is required, did multiple side quests to get gear I knew was in the game, and am still only around 40% complete with this game. Yes, the main story is only roughly a third of the game's overall content. Now, this isn't the biggest game ever. This is not Elden Ring, and honestly, I think it would hurt the game if it was any larger. There's already enough Koroks for that. We don't need another size upgrade just to throw an extra 100 Koroks for completion. I'd say, given what the game is trying to be, there is more than enough to discover, and the rewards for your time seem worth the lengths you go to in order to complete the challenges. There aren't any separate game modes that are vastly different from what you experience just out of the box. This is a tried and true open world game. After calculating all aspects of the game and factoring them into my rating list, I am giving this game the objective rating of S tier. I believe this game is well worth the price and offers a lot to the player. Fans of this genre will appreciate the game, and this may bring newcomers to the series, but also may deter completionists. It's too long and the reward is not worth the time. In addition to some of the more interesting aspects of the story and some of my personal gripes with controlling the Sage abilities, the only other reason this isn't objectively an X tier is because of the Koroks. There are 1,000 of these little fuckers to find, and some are more obvious than others. Sometimes they're simple, other times you have to escort these guys 10 miles in the opposite direction. If these weren't mandatory for completion, this would easily be X tier. And then, for my subjective tier list, I have to put this at my personal highest rating of addictive fun. I don't feel as though this is a game I only play once and then never pick up again. This is an experience which will keep me entertained probably for the next few years. Even when I found every shrine in Breath of the Wild, I still had fun running around, fighting enemies, and finishing side quests I hadn't completed. It's just a fun game I find myself revisiting time and time again, and when I hit the mood to play, I'm in that mode for several days at a time, not just a couple hours. And more map space just means more opportunities to discover and explore. This game provides adequate challenge for fans who want some tougher enemies to fight, as well as simple to understand puzzles and story for all ages to love, complete with surprisingly intuitive controls and an iconic art style that Zelda fans have come to love. Overall, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom sits objectively high and personally favorable on my tier list. And with that said, that concludes my ratings. Did you hate him or did you agree with him? Leave a comment for that. Anyways, I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and I'll see you for the next Retoro review. I'm gone.